Gentlemen, Ukraine Crisis Media Center starts its work. We greet everyone who joined us here and online. And you may provide your questions through Facebook. The topic of the first press briefing is presentation of the new edition of law on Ukrainian state aid to business entities. And we give the floor to Igor Soldatenko. Please, you are given the floor. Good afternoon, dear journalists, those who joined us here in the hall of Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and we greet everyone who watch our broadcasting. Let me introduce the participants of today's discussion of this updated law on state aid. Head of Antimonopoly Committee, Olga Pishchanska. Deputy Head, Natalia Boromytska. Oksana Diaghileva, Director of Department, and Stefan Sabau, Head of Expert Group for support of Antimonopoly Committee to introduce rules for state aid. And I would like to give the floor to Olga Stanislavovna Pishchanska, Head of Antimonopoly Committee of Ukraine. Thank you. First, I would like to thank all the journalists and public unions and the community who joined us today, the viewers who watch us online, who are interested in this event and who are interested in the changes we are going to introduce concerning state aid. I would like to state that these changes, these directions are really important for us and for the state on the whole, for the whole society. First, I believe we should speak about and tell the audience what state aid is, because during the last 3 years there were some miscommunications, and this law was introduced as the main law to regulate state aid in 2017. The state aid is practically any allocations of money or state guarantees, material resources provided to any companies, separate individual companies. It is worth noting that state aid distorts competition. When we provide state assistance to one entity, we limit all other entities that could compete in the market and provide quality products or services. When this law was introduced in 2017, we provided two conceptual targets. From one side, we wanted to normalize the approaches, and from the other side, we planned the agreement on EU agreement, and we had new obligations concerning regulation and changes of approaches to assessment of state aid. So we had to change our way of thinking, post-Soviet thinking, that everything should be provided by the state. That people may use state funds when they need it. So as of today, we may say that during 3 years, we found gaps in the draft law. Also, we have the aim to add one of the main functions. This is the assessment of influence on trade between the countries of EU and Ukraine in the process of assessment of state aid. And also, by this law, we introduce detailed interpretations and approaches. And in the future, this will help not only to spend money of the state properly, but to properly assess whether this aid is needed, whether it should be provided or it should be returned to the budget. As a result, we believe that we are sure that this will promote competition and will stop improper expenditures of the state budget. I would like to thank our partners from the European Union because we together developed these new norms of this law, and I would like to give the floor to Stefan in order that he would be able to tell us about the areas of this law. Thank you.
Olga, for the very nice words. Thank you very much, Igor, for moderating our today discussion. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name, as you see, is Stefan Sabau. I'm the team leader of the EU-funded project to support Ukraine and AMCU to enforce state aid rules. I would like to thank you very much today for being with us, offline and online. I understand that our session is streamlined as well, and I'm very happy that the audience is larger. Yes, due to
Can you please keep the mic closer? Yeah, thanks.
It's better this way? Okay, thank you very much. So we are very pleased to be able to welcome the representative of Ukrainian mass media today to discuss more about state aid and about our project. But I think that state aid is more interesting, and you should believe me. As you may already know, Ukraine has the obligation under the association agreement to implement state aid rules. The process has already started, and it happened a few years ago when the law on state aid, which is the main topic and the star of our discussion today, has been adopted in August 2017. As you can imagine, however, the things were not perfect from the very beginning, and I think no one could expect it to happen from the very beginning. It's quite normal when a new and complex topic such as state aid has to be introduced in a country's legislative system, and it's normal to face inherent difficulties and obstacles. Therefore, together with AMCU, who is the authorized body in the field of state aid, we decided to come up with courageous but necessary efforts to start the amending process of the law. We need this process in order to bring the law on state aid and its provision more close to the Ukrainian realities and more close to its fundamental scope. And the fundamental scope of the law on state aid is protection of a fair competitive environment for companies acting on Ukrainian markets. In the European Union, state aid is strictly regulated because it distorts competition. This is the basis. Yes, it is regulated by the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union and, of course, by a huge set of rules. Some of them are summarized here. You can see this folder is huge and comprehensive. Those rules state that any state intervention into the economies, into markets, is seen to be distortive for the competition environment. So, in the treaty, state aid is forbidden. But the other set of rules say that state aid can and it is allowed to intervene in the economies only when markets fail to perform properly or where states need to achieve particular objectives in different spheres. In the European Union, we base our welfare on the proper functioning of the internal market. The internal market and its viability is one of the pillars of the Union, and it is based on companies which are competing freely and continuously and fairly fighting for providing citizens with better goods or services and at affordable prices. In this context, we have solid grounds to say that state aid policies are designed for the large benefit of the citizens, consumers, and taxpayers in the end. We believe that Ukraine aims to the same goals and fights for a better economy and for better living standards for its citizens. And this is, of course, with an aim to cover the whole country. It's worth to mention that understanding of state aid principles and rules is not only important at the level of grantors, central or local authorities, regulatory bodies, or so on. A better understanding of state aid is important also for companies, who are basically the beneficiaries of state aid, and for its citizens, Ukrainian citizens, for the reasons that I have mentioned a few seconds ago. Therefore, media is a very important partner when it comes to widely and properly advocate state aid rules and concepts. I'm speaking now from my experience. I'm Romanian, and I have been through this process of implementing state aid rules in my country before our accession to the EU, which happened in 2007. Ukraine and Romania have many things in common. The sizes of our countries, the institutional architecture, the need to build and restructure economies coming from the centralized Soviet system towards modern market economies. Olga already mentioned this. Challenges are ongoing, and no matter how much time has passed since we have changed our system, we still face problems. In this context, state aid is a modern tool, a genuine European value which contributes to enhance competitiveness and growth throughout viable markets. This tool is gradually implemented also in the Ukrainian legislation and also in practice in order to meet the requirements of the European Union and the Association Agreement. Today we are going to discuss also in brief the project itself, our support provided to AMCU in the field of state aid. But more important, AMCU will present today the law on state aid, its scope, and the main amendments brought to the legislation in order to make it more European, if I may use this term. From our point of view, it's extremely important today. This is a very important moment for us because it sums up a long and complicated process of drafting state aid legislation for Ukraine. Together with AMCU, we have been working for almost 3 years to put the first brick of the state aid system in Ukraine. We truly believe that our work will be a complete success when we finally will see the law on state aid amended, modernized for a better economic environment. Once again, I'm happy to see the involvement of mass media in our public discussion today and with the topic related to state aid. I know that nowadays COVID is a more debated topic, but the pandemic will pass and we have to focus on the developing of the economies with sustainable and adequate rules. So we count on you to pass on the right messages about state aid to every stakeholder, from Verkhovna Rada to citizens, from ministries and central authorities to all oblasts of Ukraine, from big companies to small and medium-sized enterprises, and so on. Of course, a more comprehensive and clear understanding of state aid rules and principles takes time. We do not expect miracles overnight. We are dealing with state aid in the European Union for more than 60 years, and still the issue is a moving target. Rules are constantly revised and adapted to the dynamics of the economies. Member states are still learning by doing, and nobody pretends to have the full knowledge of the topic. The European Union itself is aware of this complexity, of the field, and in general and in particular, and this is why they have offered from the very beginning, through the Eastern Partnership Instrument, technical assistance to Ukraine in its efforts to build its state aid system. And this is why our project is here. I'm absolutely convinced that together we'll be able to succeed in Ukraine as well, and in the future we'll have a strong and efficient state aid system in place to contribute in the end to the welfare of the Ukrainian citizens. I will stop here. I will give the floor back to our moderator, and I will be coming back later on with additional details about the scope of work. Thank you very much.
Дякуємо, Штефане, дякуємо, пані Ольго, за те, що ввели нас в контекст угоди про асоціацію.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sabau. Thank you, Olga, that you introduced us to this topic. The active law has been working for only 3 years. Now, I'm pleased to give the floor to Ms. Oksana Diaghileva, who will explain why these amendments to legislation are needed in order to improve the state aid as an institution. I encourage the journalists to ask questions to me, and then I will read them. So, Ms. Oksana Diaghileva, AMCU, Director of the Department of Monitoring and Supervision of State Aid. Thank you. I disagree that the law is ineffective. In its current version, it has been working quite well. It was passed it came into force in 2017, although it was passed several years earlier, based on the requirements of the association rig agreement. So the law is here and it works, but it works not on the grounds which are clearly required by the agreement of association. So our task was to bring this piece of legislation in full coherence with the requirements of the association agreement. At the very beginning, that legislative initiative was drafted jointly by the staff of AMCU and experts from the European Commission, and thus it the law, it corresponds to the realities of Ukrainian economy. When we come back to the state aid in general and why it is needed, I should say that this actually means that this state wants to support somehow commercial entities which work either on the national or at the local level. Due to that support, of course, somehow the competition is distorted. So this is able to distort competition for those commercial entities which work in the same market and deliver similar goods or services. So in general, the approach in market economy is as follows, that due to that possibility to distort competition, any sort of state aid should be very transparent and fair. In Ukraine, there are several exclusions to this general rule that there should be no state aid for commercial enterprises in general in market economy. But under some conditions, in some situations, this state aid is possible. So, and this is the function of AMCU to supervise the state aid. This same approach is used in many EU countries. This partially explains why 3 years after passage, this law already requires some amendments, because it has to reflect the amendments in European legislation. Actually, we will look at the enterprises in the context of the European market. What is positive for regional enterprises? For regional enterprises, we assess the impact on competition, and if this impact on competition does not distort competition at the bigger European, so to say, level, then these enterprises will be excluded from the scope of sanctions according to this law. The second aspect which we used to have in secondary legislation there was a notion, services of general commercial interest, general economic interest. These were services which could be financed by the state. This is the provision or item which will be more detailedly described in this new version of our law. In the past, when we had doubts about such services, we relied more on the European legislation, which created difficulties for us. Thank you, Oksana. I would ask Oksana to provide 2 examples to explain more clearly what do we mean. For example, some cases when AMCU takes decision that the budget money are properly allocated for some sort of goods or services or companies, and one case when the negative decision was taken. Well, for example, financing of the public transport. Everybody knows that in Ukraine we have a market of public transport. It is competitive market, and in each city, town, settlement, there are several transport service providers, private transport service providers, and quite often we all know that the services quality is not perfect, and we want to use better services. And of course, each city in Ukraine tries to allocate as much funding as possible for procurement of new buses, trolley buses, etc. And that buses and trolley buses have to deliver services even to those passengers who have privileges like pensioners, etc. That is, who cannot pay fully for the service. That is, this public transport market, on the one side, it is a commercial market and competitive market. On the other hand, there are some public obligations, authorized to public transport, and this results in a situation when state aid is given to those for whom this competition is distorted. And AMCU in this case takes the following position. Yes, in this case, the state aid given to public transport enterprises for covering the vulnerable categories, for example, it is fair assistance, although it distorts competition, but it is acceptable. As Olga Stanislavna mentioned, this state aid might be in a form of state allocations for procurement or issuance of local guarantees. That is, local municipality may find a bank or and this bank agrees to provide some loan with a guarantee. And in this case, we provide such guarantee to a bank from which the municipality borrows money to buy buses or trolleybuses, for example. In this case, the state aid and control over it is not such terrible as or horrible as one could imagine. That is, this example shows that state aid is possible under some conditions, and our task is to check, to monitor that these conditions, these rules are met by the state agencies. One of the main principles of delivery of state services is transparency and minimal amounts. That is, the body which delivers this state aid should prove to us that the amount of state does not exceed the amount of direct expenses of an enterprise spent on the public service. Now about examples of a proper state service. I do not wish to mention the names of companies or the names of bodies, but in general, I should say that the main argument for inacceptance assessment, inacceptance characteristic, is when the state aid is given to a company which had received it without any competition, especially in cases when such competition was required by the law. For example, a local authority gives some state aid to a transport and public transport enterprise without preliminary competition among local transport enterprises for this state aid. And in this case, we review whether the competition took place, what were the results, and make decision whether that state aid was given improperly. And we have now some examples when, after such an assessment, the local authorities organized competitions, and with the results of those competitions, they awarded state aid. Thank you, Oksana. We have made 4 small video fragments to illustrate what does the state aid mean, and what deliverers of state aid should keep in mind when they do it. And we have such a video from Vinnytsia. You can find these video fragments on our website in Media Gallery section. I also would like to add that we decided to make these short videos to provide explanations to potential clients, and especially after local elections, we found out that newly elected participants of local authorities, they are unaware of this state institution, about state aid, and there is a big chance that due to this negligence, they can make mistakes, and in order to prevent this situation with the local budgets, we started this public awareness campaign. I would like to ask Olga whether you have any questions. I would like to draw your attention to such thing as non-state aid. And we contribute a lot of efforts to respond to respond to the requests from local authorities and confirm that this or that piece of aid is non-state aid. And in this new draft law, I think we had drafted sufficient descriptions and sufficient explanations which aid is not considered to be a state aid, which state could be mentioned as non-state aid, and thus excluded from the from our scope. It is quite useful to distinguish clearly between the state aid and non-state aid than to have later problems at later stage. Any further comments? Good afternoon, dear journalists and experts. My colleagues mentioned major aspects of the new draft law. Actually, this is the tool which we believe will simplify reporting and in general make life easier for both those who deliver state aid and those who receive it, and to prevent uncertainties which exist now. The law, which is now effective, was passed after the association agreement was signed, and it was imperfect, and we now try to improve it. We expect for the support of Verkhovna Rada in passage of this new draft law. We hope that it will come in force, and due to that better understanding, and thus the things will go better in general terms. Thank you. Please allow me to give the floor to Mr. Sabau and ask Mr. Sabau to explain how the project assists the Antimonopoly Committee. As you mentioned, that the state aid institution in the EU has been operational for more than 60 years. So please explain, how do you assist the Antimonopoly Committee?
Igor, thank you, Oksana, Olga, and Natalia. Indeed, we have to say something about the support project, about the CESAR project. We are here since the law came into force 1 month after, since September 2017. And of course, we didn't start to perform very well from the very beginning. Everything was changed, an ongoing process to better provide our support to AMCU. Basically, the main objective of our project is to assist AMCU in the process of the harmonization of Ukrainian legislation with relevant state aid EU laws and rules, procedures, and so on. You can imagine that the process is not easy at all, and it requires a lot of cooperation at different levels and different fields. Mainly, of course, we cooperate with our beneficiary, with AMCU, on simultaneous layers. Yes, we cooperate on legislation, on drafting and on its enforcement, on trainings and advocacy. And this is what can I describe in a few words? Yes, the cooperation is more in depth, because we basically work in the Antimonopoly committee premises. So we are working together basically with the state aid department. Actually, our event today is a part of our advocacy activities we intensively carry out, and lately we have been able to come up with some very successful outcomes, very well received by our audience, and we will continue with this advocacy campaign. We need to raise awareness, and we need to make people understand what state aid rules are about. Given the type of activity that AMCU carries on in the field of state aid as authorized body, we have also structured our activity in such a way that assistance is provided in all the early mentioned fields. So we have divided our activities into 4 main components. The first one is dedicated to the legislative process, where our experts assist AMCU and relevant stakeholders to develop and implement legislation, even if we talk about the primary legislation of the secondary legislation. Then the component 2 addresses the daily work on case support and case assessment, and here we talk also about the notification phase, but moreover we assist AMCU also in additional discussions they carry out with representatives of state aid grantors. We have also a very important component. This is the 3rd component, which is dedicated to trainings, and here, together with AMCU, we share our knowledge and raise awareness of the most important aspects of the state aid field. And we do this both at central and at local levels, where we see that most of the measures are granted. And last but not least, we have already mentioned component 4. This is communication component and advocacy. Now, all the assistance that we provide continuously to AMCU is financed by the European Union, because the harmonization of the domestic legislation with the EU state aid law is a complex and sensitive process. It relates to various aspects and tackles functioning of the administration at various levels. Our experts are not only familiar with the state aid rules and acquis, but they also have solid experience in how to transpose difficult rules into understandable provisions of the legal system where there is no EU control. Implementation of the state aid controlling system does not mean that state aid cannot be anymore granted, and this is something this is a myth basically, and main part of our job is to dismantle this myth. Yes, there is in fact nothing more misleading than such a conclusion that state aid is forbidden to be granted. State aid control is about ensuring that established state aid compatibility rules are respected by all authorities granting aid in relation to all undertakings and companies. As this is mainly because we need to ensure a fair competition environment and to ensure a level playing field for all companies competing here in Ukraine. State aid rules thus ensure that same level playing field for all market entities. This is why state aid rules serve to preserve competition. Even in the rich member states, or in the member states who have access to structural funds, a lot more state aid is granted than here in Ukraine. We have to believe that all the states, more developed or less developed, partners or members of the European Union, grant state aid constantly. For instance, in Poland in 2019, the level of the state aid granted was more than 1.5% of the total GDP of the country, which is a huge amount. In the European Union, Of course, granted, state aid is not eliminated, granting state aid is not eliminated, but it is better structured. And I can say that it is also better targeted to achieve goals, more efficient, and obviously a lot more transparent. The same goal and the same thing can also be achieved here in Ukraine with a view to ensure that state indeed supports well-being of all citizens and good economic initiatives. Many member states succeeded before accession. I am optimistic that we will for sure succeed in Ukraine as well. Ukraine deserves to be part of the European Union, and state aid is a key element for consolidating the market economy and for ensuring a smooth road to European accession. It is often related that state aid rules are established to ensure that administration intervenes where market is not sufficient and the interests of consumers are not properly addressed. We repeat this over and over again whenever we have case meetings, trainings, or even simple discussions with the Ukrainian authorities. In the project, with other experts and together with AMCU, we simply believe in this context that the state aid rules contribute to building modern market economy. In such context, law on state aid has been prepared by the AMCU, the amended version, together with the project assistants, and we involved all our best experts to come up with a extremely successful piece of legislation. It should be perceived as the next step in the better state aid control and thus better budgetary spending. The law takes a lot from the constantly changing acquis, European acquis, but above all is built with a view to use AMCU experience gained so far. And we took into consideration all the Ukrainian particularities, all the Ukrainian specificities in relation to the economic environment. Anyway, having said that, we can say that the legislative process ahead of us will be probably very difficult, and that's why I fully support Natalia when she said we need support from the Verkhovna Rada level to all levels, ministries, local, central authorities. And also awareness is necessary to make sure that all the stakeholders understand why we have amended the law and why this law is seen as a better tool for future. I hope this short presentation of mine attracted some attention and increases your appetite for state aid knowledge, and of course we will remain open to further discuss and explore ways forward. Our doors are always open and we'll be very happy to continue discussing this topic with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Дуже дякую, Штефане. Якщо раптом нас хтось зараз дивиться з міста Хмельницький, журналісти...
Thank you, Stefan. If somebody is watching us from Khmelnytsk, I would like to announce that next Monday and Tuesday in Khmelnytsk, in the local Antimonopoly committee, we will deliver training for deliverers of state aid for local MPs. And what actually we this is one of the hours trainings out of the series which Mr. Sabau mentioned, and we will explain how to provide state aid on timely basis when it is truly required. We are approaching to the end of our discussion, but Oksana asked for the floor, and now I am pleased to give the floor to her.
I would like to comment in order not to have the impression that we always provided examples of local bodies of power. It may be perceived like this, that we are dealing only with local budgets and state help is only local budgets, and this is not the case. And you may see it from the title that the state budget is also the resource of the state aid, and we verify the state support that is provided by the ministries to state enterprises or other enterprises in different spheres, and we verify it whether it is acceptable, and sometimes we recognize this help as unacceptable. And I would like to say that our laws that are now in effect, many of them, they include some measures of support for the entities that that entities may be provided with state help, with state aid, and we should analyze all the laws that are now working, and we may adapt them in order not to contradict European legislation. They should not contradict the association agreement. So this is not about just local budgets. This is about state budget as well. Of course, this is the case. And I do not see any comments, and we will wrap up. Let me once again remind to you who was present here in UCMC Press Center. First of all, we would like to thank UCMC to provide us with opportunity to bring this information to the broader public and to present a new version of the law on state aid. Today we had Olga Pishchanska, head of Antimonopoly Committee of Ukraine, Natalia Borominska, she is deputy head, Oksana Diaghileva, head of department of monitoring of Stefan Sabau, head of expert group, EU project on state aid rules implementation. We have one comment. I will read it. Do we have at least one program of aid that is directed for the development of the regions here in Ukraine? We have many programs like this. Each local body of power, they have their own programs of development for the regions, separate programs for different areas in the region. And the function of Anti-Monopoly Committee is to assess these programs and the rules of provision of help, whether they meet requirements of the law on state aid. This is briefly about this question. I would like to add, there are many programs like this in Ukraine, and in Europe there are separate criteria concerning acceptability of the state help for the development of the regions. And we use these criteria when we assess state aid that is provided by local bodies of power, not to a separate enterprise for some goal, but for a group of business entities in order that they be able to develop and invest in their activity. We use such criteria for the development of the regions for these programs. One more question. I know the answer, but Oksana will answer. Do you have a catalog of such programs? Do you have a list? It would be great to have it. This is a wonderful idea. We need it. And Stefan, maybe we should think how to organize such a catalog of such programs. Unfortunately, we do not have it now. This is a big problem. So now we have such legislation on state aid that we, Anti-Monopoly Committee and Euro Commission in Europe, we assess what was submitted to us. So we get information about these programs only in case the ministry or local body of power voluntarily provide this information to us because they want to work in accordance with legislation and want to be sure that they do not violate Ukrainian or European legislation. Unfortunately, we do not have resources how we could get this information about all these programs. Going back to the title of our department, this is control and monitoring of the state aid. We understand control. This is verification and monitoring. And this question is about this, actually. How we may get this information? How can we get information about all those programs and events that are carried out or that are planned by those who provide us aid, local bodies of power, state bodies of power. And I would like to thank the journalists, because often we get this information about these events, about these programs, to get this information from the mass media outlets, from some TV programs or newspapers, journals, or we find it on the internet. Then we use our right and we address to the potential provider, and then we demand from them to provide information. That's why, using this opportunity, I call on journalists to participate, to get involved. If you know about some bodies of power who plan some programs, and you now understand what the state help is, if you see that state help will be provided, please inform this to us. This will help. Thank you very much, Oksana. And you partly answered to the next question. Does the committee carry out the search of these programs if the information was not provided to the Antimonopoly Committee? Yes, we are trying to do this, but still we didn't find the proper instrument where we can get this information. Maybe we really need this catalog. So we carry out such activities. We have such entities that address us, and they are working in competitive market, and they believe that, for example, unacceptable help was provided, and we have several cases, individual cases, when we recognize such help, such aid as unacceptable. So the entity provides the right, and they address to us, and their competitors had to return some money to the budget, and they could spend this money for their own activities, of course. So going back to the previous question about the catalog, in the classic form, we do not have it, but on the site of the Antimonopoly Committee, there is a state help aid section. This is not the catalog, but this is the list of decisions of the committee, and you may work with this if you have a scientific or researcher's interest or journalist's interest towards this. I would like to give the floor once again to Stefan Sabau. So our conference is wrapping up, so we are giving the floor to Mr. Shah for final remarks.
My side, I would very much support the idea to have such a catalog, but before this catalog, I think we should work more on our inventory. Yes, and here I encourage everybody, because to be very honest, we face working daily with AMCU in their premises. We see they are doing all their best to send out requests for information to grantors, to send us, to notify us about the existing measure. First of all, before designing new measures, we have to know what is going on with the existing measures. Yes, because at the end they will have to be aligned. So. That's why I'm encouraging everybody not to be afraid of notifying existing measures, because our scope is not to block them. Our scope is to make them compatible. And because you touched base the regional investment, yes, regional investment, regional aid guidelines are a very important piece of secondary legislation designed to attract investment in the regions of Ukraine. So I encourage everybody to support us, to be our partners in developing and updating the inventory of state aid, of existing measures, of course. And the press should alarm us and AMCU when they identify new measure. Thank you very much.
Дякуємо. Ще питання. Я думаю, що це вже буде останнє питання.
One more question about the cases that were connected with the ministries, and what were these ministries? What were these cases? Let's say we didn't open such cases. Before opening the case, we do not open it right at once when we get some information. If we get some information, no matter what was the resource, For example, from the media, we get the information, then we send a requirement to a provider. From the start, we provide an opportunity to voluntarily submit this notification to us in order to assess it, and only in case if the provider do not want to do this or do not believe that this is necessary, then we open a case. Despite whether we find a violation, but we analyze the situation. So this is the instrument that we should use. Example that I brought about local bodies of power. We opened a case in that case because one of the competitors, he complained to us and we addressed the provider, and they say that they shouldn't provide notification to us, and then we opened the case. If we're speaking about the ministries, we didn't face situations like this, but we had situations when we mildly insisted that the ministry should think about it and to provide notification to us, and they provided this notification and we recognized such state aid. In that case, we analyzed it was acceptable. So they needed to make some changes, but in the result, it was acceptable. I would like to add, also we have preventive actions. We have trainings, constant communication with the bodies of local power and with the profile ministries. Starting this year, also we have cooperation with territorial departments. This is a start of monitoring. Our territorial departments fruitfully cooperate with the bodies of local power in order first to provide consultations, because there are many questions that appear, and before creating regional programs in order that these correspond to the requirements of law and state aid, starting today there is opportunity to address these territorial departments. And the central body, we have additional resource to cooperate fruitfully with the profile ministries with bigger cases to analyze the influence on competition and efficiency of the use of state money. Once again, I would like to say that there is main aim. We have two of them. This is equal conditions for competition, efficiency, and the efficient use of state money. Thank you. Our time is up. I would like, on behalf of Antimonopoly Committee and on behalf of the EU project, we would like to thank all the participants, and we would like to thank the audience. And we invite journalists to address the Antimonopoly Committee, to send journalists requests. And the project is working in the premise of Antimonopoly Committee. You may address our press service, and you may contact us by phone or by email. So please, you are invited to address us. We thank UCMC. Till the next time, goodbye.